Hey everyone, ready to get inside your own head a little?
Sounds fun.
We're diving into Thinking Fast and Slow today. It's by Daniel Kahneman.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
It really is. This book, it's like a roadmap to how we make decisions. And trust me, some of it's seriously mind-blowing.
What always gets me about Kahneman's work is it shows how our brains kind of set us up to make the same mistakes over and over again.
So it's not just random slip-ups, like there are patterns to how we mess up.
Totally. He calls them cognitive biases.
Okay, gotta remember that one.
Ding.
Cognitive biases.
Yeah.
So our brains are literally wired to make these specific errors.
Exactly. And the whole thing starts with this idea he has about two different systems in our minds. System 1 and System 2.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for us. What's System 1?
System 1, that's your fast automatic thinking. It's practically instinct, like when you recognize someone's face.
Or when, like instantly that 2 plus 2 is 4.
Exactly. That's System 1 in action. Super quick, super intuitive.
Gotcha. So if that's System 1, what's the deal with System 2?
System 2, no, that's the slow, deliberate part of your brain. It's the one that kicks in when you're, say, doing your taxes or learning a new language, something that takes real mental effort.
So it's like System 1 is running on autopilot, and System 2 is when we got to really put in the work.
Perfect analogy. And the catch is, System 1's in charge way more than we realize.
Oh, how so? I mean, it makes sense that our brains would want to be efficient, right?
Right, but that efficiency, well, it can come with a price.
How so?
System 1, it loves taking shortcuts. Kahneman calls them heuristics. These are mental shortcuts that help us make quick decisions without overthinking everything.
Makes sense. Can you give us an example, though, for our listeners who might not be familiar with the term heuristic?
Sure, let's say you're at the store trying to pick a cereal. You see a brand you recognize, bam, you grab it.
Wow.
You're not comparing prices or reading nutrition labels. You're using a shortcut, that brand recognition.
Oh, I do that all the time. So I'm using a heuristic right there.
You got it. And most of the time, heuristics are helpful. Problem is, they can also lead us straight into those biases we talked about earlier.
Okay, so how does that happen? How can a shortcut make us biased?
Take the availability heuristic, for example. This is where we judge how likely something is to happen, based on how easily we remember similar things happening. Like, let's say there was a plane crash in the news recently. Suddenly, flying seems super dangerous, even though statistically, it's one of the safest ways to travel.
Right, because that plane crash is fresh in my mind, it feels riskier, even if it isn't really.
Exactly. And it's not just plane crashes. If there were a bunch of robberies in your neighborhood, it might suddenly feel way more dangerous, even if it isn't statistically more dangerous than before.
So how do we stop ourselves from getting tricked by these heuristics?
Honestly, step 1 is just knowing they exist. Like realizing that our brains are wired to take shortcuts, that's half the battle.
So when I'm feeling anxious about something, I can ask myself, is this real, or is it just the availability heuristic messing with me?
Exactly. You got to engage that system too. Slow down, think it through.
Find that balance between gut feeling and careful thought.
You got it. That's the key to being a better thinker.
I love this stuff.
Yeah.
So what other kinds of biases are lurking in our brains?
One that really impacts our decisions is something called loss aversion. Turns out losses feel way worse to us than wins feel good.
Loss aversion. Tell me more. How does that actually affect us?
Imagine this. You have a 50-50 shot at winning $100 or losing $50. Would you take that bet?
I don't think so. I mean, yeah, I could win $100, but losing 50, that just feels too risky.
And that's loss aversion right there. Even though logically it's a good bet, that fear of losing, it overrides the potential gain.
It's like our emotions are getting in the way of being rational.
100%. And that's why people cling to things even when it doesn't make sense. Like holding on to losing investments, hoping they'll bounce back.
Ugh, I know that feeling. Loss aversion makes it so hard to let go, even when we should.
It really does. And it's amazing how these little biases can shape so many of our choices.
It really is. So we've talked System 1, System 2 heuristics, and now this loss aversion. What other gems does Kahneman have for us?
Oh, get ready for this one. It's called framing effects. Basically, how information is presented can totally change how we decide.
Framing effects, huh? Give me an example.
Imagine you're told a medical treatment has a 90% survival rate. That sounds pretty good, right?
Oh yeah, 90% survival, I'll take those odds.
Now imagine they tell you that same treatment has a 10% mortality rate. Does it feel different?
Ooh, yeah. It's the same information, but suddenly it sounds riskier.
Exactly. Framing it as survival versus mortality, it triggers different emotions even though the facts are the same.
Wow. So just changing the wording can make us see things completely differently.
It's crazy, right? And it happens all the time,
Yeah.
which is why we got to be super aware of these framing effects. Make sure we're deciding based on the actual facts, not just how they're presented.
This is eye-opening. I'm already starting to question everything I thought I knew about how I make decisions. What else can we learn from Kahneman about how our minds work?
Well, buckle up for this one. This is where it gets really wild. Kahneman talks about the remembering self versus the experiencing self. Essentially, he says we've got two selves, the one living life in the moment and the one who remembers it later.
Whoa, two selves. That's a trip. Tell me more.
Think about a vacation you took. You had all these different experiences, good and bad, right? But when you think back on it, you're not remembering every single moment.
No, it's more like the highlights,
Uh,
the best parts, and maybe those cringeworthy moments too.
exactly. And Kahneman says it's that remembering self who calls the shots on stuff like whether you'd take that vacation again, even though they're only working with a highlight reel, not the whole experience.
So I might go back to a restaurant just because of that amazing dessert I had, even if the rest of the meal was meh.
Totally. The remembering self loves that peak moment, the
Ah.
ending. It colors the whole memory.
Whoa, that's wild. So we're not making decisions based on how we actually lived something,
Yeah.
but on our often flawed memories of it.
Mind blowing, isn't it? And then there's this other bias, overconfidence.
Oh yeah, we've all met those people who are a little too sure of themselves.
Okay.
What's Kahneman's take on overconfidence?
It's more than just a personality quirk, you know? Overconfidence is like a built-in feature of our brains, according to Kahneman. We think we're better than we are, even when the evidence says otherwise.
So it's not just those people, the ones who think they're always right. We all do this to some extent.
Oh yeah, everyone's got a little overconfidence in them. It pops up everywhere, from investing to politics to just daily life. We think we can predict the future way more accurately than we actually can.
Oof, yeah. I can think of a few times I was so sure I was right about something and turned out to be completely wrong.
Happens to the best of us. Overconfidence blinds us to our own limits. We don't even question our own judgment.
It's like we think we're experts when we're not. Kahneman calls it the illusion of skill, right?
That's the one. We mix up familiarity with actual expertise, like someone who thinks they're a stock market whiz just because they watch the financial news every day.
But knowing stuff about stocks doesn't mean you can predict how they'll perform, right?
You got it. Knowledge isn't the same as understanding. Kahneman makes a really interesting point about this. In a lot of fields, being an expert is more about recognizing patterns, applying rules, than having some magical intuition.
So, no crystal ball needed, just a deep understanding of how things actually work.
Exactly. Real expertise is built on experience, analysis, and honestly, a willingness to admit when you're wrong.
I'm seeing the connections here. System 1's jumping to conclusions with those heuristics, then System 2's there to slow us down and double check. But then we have this overconfidence and the illusion of skill throwing us off even more.
Yep, it's this whole web of cognitive processes going on. But once you understand the pieces, it makes your own thinking, your own decisions a lot clearer.
I'm with you. So, does Kahneman give us any hope? Like, are there ways to fight these biases and make smarter choices?
Absolutely. One of the biggest things he talks about is just slowing down. Engage that system two. Don't always let system one run the show.
So, don't just go with your gut all the time.
Intuition's got its place, for sure.
Mhm.
But big decisions, you got to get your analytical brain involved.
Got it. What about other techniques? Anything we can do to outsmart our own brains?
There's a whole bunch of debiasing techniques out there. Basically, they're tricks to help you spot and weaken those biases.
Ooh, debiasing. Sounds fancy. What's an example of that?
Here's a simple one, but it works. It's called considering the opposite. So you're about to make a choice, right? Take a second to imagine the opposite of what you're leaning towards.
Like, if I'm about to invest in something because I'm feeling super optimistic, I should force myself to think of all the reasons it could tank.
Boom. Exactly that. By considering the opposite, you're fighting that confirmation bias, where we only look for info that supports what we already believe.
I need to write that down, considering the opposite. Super useful.
Yeah.
Any other debiasing tricks you like?
Pre-mortem analysis is another good one. Pretend your decision's already been made and it was a total disaster. Now, brainstorm all the ways it could have gone wrong.
Whoa, that's dark. But I get it. It's like a mental autopsy, looking for weak spots before they happen.
Exactly. You can spot problems in advance, make backup plans. It helps you avoid that whole, I should seen that coming feeling.
These are awesome. It's like we're learning to be more skeptical of our own thoughts.
That's not a bad thing. A little skepticism is healthy when it comes to decision making.
Agreed.
Oh,
Okay, so we've got all these biases to watch out for, these techniques to try. What else is going on in our brains that affects how we think?
oh, this is a big one. Cognitive ease. It's basically how comfortable we feel when processing information. When something's easy to understand, remember, believe, we get this sense of like, yeah, this feels true.
So if it sounds good, it must be true. Is that what you're saying?
Kinda. Our brains are wired to equate easy processing with truthfulness. Crazy, right?
Totally. Like, if something's written in a clear font, it seems more believable, even if the content's bogus. Or a catchy slogan makes us like a product more.
You nailed it. That's why marketing works, by the way.
Yikes. It's like we're constantly being manipulated without even realizing it.
It can feel that way. That's why slowing down, engaging that system two thinking is crucial. When we analyze the information, the actual evidence, we're less likely to fall for tricks.
It's like that saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Exactly. Cognitive ease can feel good, but don't let it fool you. Be skeptical, demand proof.
Okay, so cognitive ease can lead us astray, but surely it's not always a bad thing, right?
You're right, it's not all bad. Cognitive ease is actually essential for learning new stuff. When we practice something over and over in a familiar setting, System 1 starts taking over. Think about driving a car.
Yeah, at first it's all concentration, all the time. But now I can practically do it in my sleep.
See, that's cognitive ease in action. You've mastered a complex skill, it's automatic now, freeing up your brain for other stuff.
So it's a double-edged sword, basically. It can make us believe lies and help us master new things.
Exactly. The key is knowing how it works, so we can use it to our advantage instead of being used by it. Now, there's this other human quirk Kahneman talks about. It's our need to explain everything. We want causes for things, even when those things are totally random.
Our need for explanations. That sounds interesting. I feel like I do that.
We all do. Our brains are like pattern-seeking machines. We see cause and effect everywhere, even where it doesn't exist.
Like if I win a few poker hands in a row, suddenly I'm on a roll, even though it's just luck.
Exactly. We crave reasons, even if there aren't any. It's how superstitions are born.
I'm also thinking about conspiracy theories, people seeing connections where there are none.
That's a perfect example. It can get us into trouble.
Yeah.
So how do we fight this urge to invent patterns out of thin air?
I'm guessing the answer is slow down, think it through.
You're getting good at this. When you find yourself jumping to conclusions, especially if it feels good to believe, take a step back. Is there real evidence, or are you just filling in the gaps with your own story?
Got it. Sometimes things just happen. There's not always some grand plan.
That's a tough one for our brains to accept, but it's true. Now, this next topic might sound a little dry, but bear with me. It's about statistics and how bad we are at thinking statistically.
Statistics. Oh, I feel a headache coming on.
It's not that bad, I promise. Kahneman's point is we get swayed by stories, anecdotes, even when they don't represent the bigger picture.
You mean we focus on the exceptions, not the rule?
Exactly. A juicy story grabs our attention, even if it's statistically unlikely. We end up making choices based on fear or excitement, not on what's actually probable.
This reminds me of those lottery ads showing people winning millions. Makes it seem way more likely than it is.
Right. They're playing on that availability bias again, making those wins seem common, even though they're not.
So how do we get better at thinking statistically? Any tips?
For starters, know about the law of small numbers. It basically says we tend to believe small samples are representative of the whole thing. Like, if you flip a coin 5 times and get all heads, it doesn't mean the coin's rigged.
It's just a tiny sample size.
Right. Small samples are more likely to have weird, extreme results, so don't read too much into them. Be careful about drawing conclusions from limited data.
Okay, avoid jumping to conclusions from small samples. What else?
Here's another one. Regression to the mean. It means that after an extreme event, good or bad, things tend to go back to average.
So if I have a crazy good day at work, chances are tomorrow won't be as amazing.
Exactly. But we often misinterpret this like we think we're being punished for our success. It's not that. It's just statistics doing its thing.
Wow, that's a relief. Those times I felt like I was riding high and then bam, things went downhill. Maybe it wasn't my fault after all.
Might have just been regression to the mean. Understanding that can help us avoid blaming ourselves or making bad decisions based on temporary extremes.
This is a lot to take in. I gotta be honest, the more I learn about all these biases, the less confident I feel in my own judgment.
That's totally normal, but the goal isn't to make us feel dumb. It's to help us think more clearly, make better choices.
So it's not about being perfect, it's about knowing our weaknesses and working with them.
You said it. Kahneman reminds us we're all human, we all make mistakes, we're all biased, but recognizing those biases, that's the first step to overcoming them.
Love that. Okay, we've covered cognitive ease, the need for explanations, thinking statistically. What other areas does Kahneman explore that can help us make smarter decisions?
Oh, this one's juicy. He dives into the world of predictions, which, let's be honest, we all love to do, even though we're terrible at it.
Predictions. Oh
Exactly.
yeah, try to figure out what's going to happen next. We all do it. But why are we so bad at it?
It's built into us, this desire to predict. But our predictions are usually a mess of biases, emotions, and just not understanding how probability and statistics work.
So even though we think we can see into the future, most of the time, we're wrong.
Way more often than we'd like to admit. And figuring out why we get it wrong is super important if we want to make better decisions.
This sounds like a whole other rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about where our predictions go wrong and what we can do to fix them?
One of the biggest culprits is something called the planning fallacy. It's basically our tendency to underestimate how long things will take, even when we've done similar things before.
Oh, tell me about it. I'm the queen of underestimating deadlines.
Sure.
Like, I know I always take longer than I think, but I still do it every time.
That's the planning fallacy in a nutshell. We get so focused on the ideal scenario, everything running perfectly, we forget about all the things that could go wrong.
So it's like we're too optimistic about our own awesomeness.
Pretty much. We have this inside view when we're predicting, focusing on the details and how much we want things to go a certain way.
So how do we snap out of that and make more realistic predictions?
Kahneman says, take an outside view. Look at similar situations, historical data, to get a more objective picture.
So if I'm trying to figure out how long a project will take, don't just go on what I think I can do. Look at how long similar projects actually took me in the past.
Boom! You got it. Factor in that base rate, the average time it takes, and you'll be way more accurate.
Makes sense. Grounding my predictions in reality, not just my wishful thinking.
Exactly. The outside view helps you avoid those overly optimistic traps.
Planning fallacy, noted. What other prediction pitfalls should we watch out for?
This one's a bit sneaky. It's called the illusion of validity. We basically cling to the belief that we're good at predicting, even when we're not.
So even when we've been wrong a million times, we still think we can see the future.
It's crazy, right? We overestimate our ability to make sense of things, to find patterns that might not even exist.
Like those financial experts who make big predictions about the stock market and then, whoops, they're wrong again.
Perfect example. All those fancy charts and models, but they're still trying to predict something that's fundamentally unpredictable.
So how do we get over this illusion of validity? How do we get real with ourselves about our, let's say, limited psychic abilities?
It starts with admitting we don't know everything. The future's uncertain, period. Even the best predictions are just educated guesses.
So embrace the mystery, accept that some things we just can't control.
Exactly. The more we try to force certainty on the world, the more we fall for that illusion of validity.
This is all so helpful, but honestly kind of scary too. Realizing how much our thinking is shaped by things we're not even aware of.
I get it. It can feel overwhelming. But remember, the goal isn't to make you feel bad. It's to help you think better.
Right. It's not about being perfect. It's about knowing our weaknesses and working with them.
You said it. Kahneman's not trying to make us feel dumb. He's just showing us how our minds work so we can make smarter choices, live better lives.
And that's what it's all about. Well, listeners, that wraps up our deep dive into thinking fast and slow. We've covered a ton today. 2 systems of thinking, those sneaky heuristics and biases, the illusion of control, why our predictions are usually off, and so much more.
It's been a blast exploring all this with you. Hopefully you're walking away with a better understanding of your own mind and how you can use that understanding to make better decisions.
Absolutely. So next time you're facing a tough choice or trying to guess what the future holds, take a breath, engage that system 2 thinking. Ask yourself, what biases might be lurking here trying to trick me? You might be surprised what you discover. And with that, we'll leave you to ponder the amazing and sometimes confusing world inside your own head. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.